I started out making guitars as a result of wanting a guitar for myself, which I couldn't buy. At the time, I couldn't get a fingerstyle guitar, a small-bodied steel string guitar. You could just buy dreadnoughts, and that was that. And I'd had a background in woodworking. My father was quite a good amateur woodworking. And I had the great luxury of having a very, very good woodwork teacher at school. And then I made a couple of guitars, and then Jim Williams and Robin Moyes employed me to help them at Guitar Factory in Sydney doing guitar repairs, and they were making guitars, and they'd done a course in America with Charles Fox and his Offsider, and they had a pretty good idea of how to make a guitar, a system of making guitars which I don't use any longer, but it was a very good starting point. And Guitar City was where all the acoustic players went to buy guitars. Doug and Ellie Lloyd-Jones owned it, and all the great players, Tommy Emmanuel frequented us, Mike McClelland, Chris Duffy, all of those, John Kane, all of those sort of people came and went through Guitar Factory, Guitar City. And yeah, that was a very good introduction to guitar making and the music sort of business in general. The first one I made was basically out of a book, the only book I could find at the time, which was a pretty rudimentary, not very good book on how to make guitars. And it was something similar to a Gibson B25, which was sort of, I don't know why, but the B25s were probably not the best guitar Gibson ever made, but that's what it was, and it sort of worked out okay. And then I went on to start making quite a lot of O size guitars with encouragement and direction from John Morris, who was still is a great guitar teacher, and he was the go-to fingerstyle guitar teacher in Sydney at Folkways. And yeah, that's how it sort of started out, with the sort of fingerstyle guitars. And I did make a few dreadnoughts because I could sell them easily, but the fingerstyle ones were like the double O's and triple O's, which that's what I'm known for making best of all. Primarily the woods that I select for guitars or the focus of selecting the woods is on the top woods. For the back and sides, there's a lot of people using a lot of what I would call eye candy wood for the back and sides. And some of those woods are a lot of trouble, and they can look fantastic, but they don't actually produce what I would like to produce in a guitar. And they can be very problematic in terms of bending them, their stability, their general kind of user friendliness can be very poor. And it's not about acoustics, it's about what it looks like. And I don't really go there. What I look for, I mean, the main tone wood that should concern you as a guitar maker is the top. The back and sides have a very much a more minor impact on the sound of the guitar and the quality of the guitar. But what I look for in a top is the duration of ring of the top. So when you tap the top, you want the top to not just go donk, you want it to sort of have sustain. And if it has sustain, it's probably got much lower damping than a top that just goes donk. The other thing is the stiffness of the top across the grain and along the grain, and then the mass of the top. And building guitars, for me, is about building something that's loud and dynamic. And if you pick woods that are light, have very low damping, and great stiffness to weight ratio, then you're a long way to having the nuts and bolts of making the guitar. And if you pick timbers that don't have a great sustain, are relatively heavy, don't ring when you tap them, you're probably not going to win, or you're not going to make very good guitars. I very much performance driven, so not musical performance driven, but guitar performance driven. So I want guitars that work. And as I've got more and more into making guitars, the level of decoration that I use is minimal, and I'm putting all the energy into producing guitars that I would describe as musical tools. So they're guitars that musicians want to play and have responsiveness and evenness and all the rest of the desirable sort of qualities. And the other thing that's really impacted the way guitars are produced is the decoration now, the inlay and all the rest of it, most of it's done by a CNC machine. So it kind of doesn't have really, it's all about design, and some of the designs are superb and the execution with the CNC machine's great, but I'm just focusing on the way they play and the way they sound. I think one of the sort of disadvantages with a lot of factory-made guitars is it's got better and better, particularly the Chinese manufacturers, like companies like Eastman are making some really good guitars. And what they've done is they've actually asked someone who has been making guitars for a long while and has a bit of a reputation doing so to help them with the design. And that's what has happened with Artist guitars. And I've worked with other companies, with 2 companies in Vietnam and 1 in Indonesia, with sort of mediocre success. Some of the guitars from Vietnam worked really well, but they had a lot of technical problems with the factory that they just wouldn't address. But as I say, I'm not anti the concept. It's just, I think there should be a distinction between an acoustic electric guitar, shall we say, and an acoustic guitar. And I like listening to acoustic guitar. I like people who play in front of microphones. And I recognise as professional musicians, it's a task. But more and more of the really good American acoustic players are reverting back to using things like a ribbon microphone or a condenser microphone. And to me, they just sound glorious because they sound like the guitar. So yeah, it's a difficult problem, and I won't use those really heavy pickups in my guitars. How do you make a guitar that works as an acoustic guitar and an amplified guitar? The choice is really, or the way of starting the design process is, if you want to make it work acoustically, you can't use a heavy pickup. Now, a lot of the pickups in some guitars that have a lot of currency, the pickup weighs 34 grams. I've weighed them, I've studied them incredibly carefully. They're basically very similar to pickup to the old Takamine pickup, but they weigh a lot. So if you put it in perspective of trying to make a light responsive guitar, your problem is you've got 34 grams of passenger on the guitar, and the soundboard of a good guitar should weigh, the active area should be around about 100 grams. So you're adding 1/3 more weight to the guitar. And with the GG1, that's got a very lightweight pickup in it, a Fishman. They weigh virtually nothing. And it's also one of the other things that I've been doing a lot with the more adventurous, shall we say, guitars I've been making, is I've been using very lightweight bridges. So the bridges have been around the 20, 23 grams. And an ebony bridge, which, you know, has occurrence on a lot of Martin guitars, or, you know, a great many different guitars, they're sometimes 40 grams. And you're just not going to be able to get a guitar that works as well and has the great sort of volume and dynamic if you've got a really heavy bridge. It's another passenger. The GG1 guitar has been one of the best collaboration I've had with anyone, because the design, which is very, very similar to what I use in my traditional build guitar, so it's a cross brace design with some modifications of bracing angle, of the angle of the little wing braces, the distribution of the tone bars behind the bridge. There's a lot of fiddly stuff that goes into figuring out what works. The braces aren't checked into the linings in the lower bout, so they're not housed into the linings, which a lot of major guitar companies do. And for me, that just locks the top up. It stops it moving in the direction that you want it to move in. The other thing is to use reverse kerf linings, which are on a normal guitar, the cuts in the linings, and the linings are what join the side to the top and the back. The cuts are open outwards into the cavity of the guitar, into the inside of the guitar. Reverse kerf linings are the opposite. So the kerf's opening is on the sides, and there's a continuous strip of wood round the guitar on which the top, and in the case of the GG1, the back sits. And what that does is it gives you a rigid perimeter for the guitar, so that when you pick the guitar string, the energy of the guitar top goes into the guitar, and then it hits the linings and is reflected back into the guitar top. So it's like a conservation of energy, and you can get a significant amount more sustain doing that. And that's one of the principles that I learnt from Greg Smallman with his classical guitars. He has very rigid sides and a tone well which adds even more rigidity to the area upon which the top sits. And you can get a lot of sustain out of that. And you kind of, if you're making a very light, compliant, responsive top, and you use a traditional type of build, you can actually lose sustain, because you get a very instant response out of the top, and you are losing a fair bit of the energy into shaking the sides, which is not going to make a whole lot of sound. So that's another very important sort of design principle with the GG1 and my own instruments. How the guitar tops scallop too is another difference. I tend to scallop the braces of the guitar top slightly in front of the bridge plate and a little bit more behind the bridge plate. The concentration of the scallop is more under the bridge plate than it would be on a Martin, and less dispersed, less long in length. And I think that's important too. Scalloping in front of the bridge plate is a bit of a disaster. You can actually make guitars that sound pretty good, but they don't have any longevity, or very little. And that's another really important consideration too in the design of a guitar. You could sort of design the guitar to be probably a bit louder and a bit more responsive and lighter in weight and all that sort of stuff, but you're going to compromise the longevity of the guitar. And the GG1 is a serious instrument. It's not a compromise. It's a serious instrument made out of really good tone woods, all solid wood. And, you know, I just have this thing about, I don't like seeing people make instruments that have a short lifespan, and they're utilising a lot of wood that takes hundreds of years to grow. I just think it's the wrong use of the wood. And, you know, it doesn't do the customer a great deal of, you know, they're not doing them any favours. So, yeah. I think now there's a big swing back. There's a lot of interest in country music again, like the sort of popular artist of the moment. A lot of American sort of country music's become very popular again. So the Dreadnoughts and the J45s, the J45s seem to have made a real resurgence, and I really like them. If you're a singer-songwriter, you sing, you accompany yourself with guitar, the J45's probably, you know, it's one of the guitars that I make, and I make it very much like an old J45. I had a 1947 J45, which was a gorgeous guitar, not in very good nick, but it sounded great. So it sort of, it swung around a lot. I think the other thing that's become very, very prominent is the plugged-in guitar with that Takamine type pickup in it. And it just means that you can play loud, you can play in large venues. The overall sound characteristic of that pickup is one that cuts through a lot of things. It's kind of pretty aggressive. It's got a very bitey sort of edge to it, unless you start fiddling around with it. So that's become a really big thing too. And again, what you're really getting with those sort of pickup systems is not so much the guitar, it's the pickup. And I mean, I'm much more inclined to make things that work without a pickup. I think the smaller guitars that I really like are the old parlour guitars like Washburn made and Martin made. I think they're just a brilliant guitar. They're a bit of a one-trick pony, but they're a great guitar. I've made myself a lot of them, and I've made quite a lot of them. And I really like those guitars. And the 00 size guitars the same. But even with the O-size parlour guitar, you can get, if you make them slightly differently to the original ones, you can get a really nice bottom end out of them. And it's got to do with the fact that you don't make them as stiff as your bracing and everything's reduced in dimensions. Your top thickness is a little lower. You know, you just adjust all of this to suit the guitar that you're making. So every different style of guitar you make slightly differently to accommodate what you're trying to achieve. What makes my guitars sought after? It's a really difficult sort of thing to answer, really. They just work, and as I said before, I really like working with the musician. It's like being a bespoke tailor. So, you know, you're trying to fit the guitar to the person, and I think I'm pretty good at doing that, and I'll put the time into doing that. And they last. Like in the last few years, I've had some guitars I made 30 years ago come back in for a refret, and that's about all they've needed. So they've survived, and people come in sometimes with my guitars and they kind of apologise and say, oh, you know, I'm really sorry I've scratched it up, or I've done this and done that. And my response to that is always, I make guitars to be played. I don't make them to be looked at or collected. I make them to be used because they're musical tools. And it delights me to see an instrument that someone has really played. And then if it needs a little bit of remediation here and there, we can do that. But I haven't had guitars come in that were sort of failures. You know, they'd failed structurally, or they were in, even though they'd been used a lot, they were never in a condition where they weren't restorable. Sometimes they needed refinishing. Sometimes it was a fair bit of money. The wear and tear took a lot of getting out. But I think I have a reputation for making things that worked really well and didn't have a lot of problems. And you know, we talked about material selections. The neck wood that I love is stuff called New Guinea rosewood, and I can make a neck out of that. I'll string the guitar up, I'll adjust the neck, it'll go out and it won't come back. Whereas a lot of the more traditional woods like mahogany, which you can't actually get old growth mahogany anymore, it's plantation stuff. I'm not a big fan of plantation mahogany for a neck. It's okay. And some of the other woods that people use for necks, I think New Guinea rosewoods, it's one of the world's most stable hardwoods. It's got a very good stiffness to weight ratio. It's not light, it's not as light as mahogany, but it's really, it doesn't move around. And with a good truss rod in it, half a turn usually solves a problem. I like it a lot. It's very different looking, and it's a little bit difficult to finish because it's very open poured. So it needs a lot of grain filling and it needs a lot of lacquer to get it flat and shiny and looking the way it should. The book took Trevor and I about 5 years to write. Trevor is a scientist and a very good guitar maker, and I'd written some things about making guitars, but when it came to the acoustics of the guitar and how the guitar actually functioned, I just realised that you're talking science and I'm not a scientist or much of a mathematician. And that's where Trevor's great strength is. He's a very good mathematician and a very clever practical scientist. So the book contains a lot of very complicated mathematics and a lot of very good practical knowledge. And the science is there. It's like the show me the money. If you say, this is how this works, and you don't offer the proof, then a lot of people, particularly those also writing in the area, will be, show us the money. And the thing with the book is, the show us the money's there in bucket loads. Two things I always wanted to achieve. One was to write a book on how guitars work, and I don't think, it may sound, you know, boastful or whatever, but I don't think anyone could do it any better. I really don't, and I don't think anyone will even attempt to, because it doesn't need doing, and the amount of work that went into it is just like, I think Trevor sort of said, he's got a doctorate, he said there's probably 2 or 3 or more PhD theses just in the book, and I would agree with it. So the book for me was something that I wanted to do always, and Trevor was the way that it happened. And I'm really happy with the book, and it sold beyond, you know, I was, you know, in the pessimistic sort of fashion that you have making guitars, or not, that's not very well expressed, but you're never going to sort of make $1 million making guitars, or very few people have as individual luthiers. And I was sort of thinking the book would probably sell and we'd probably do all right, but it's actually sold way beyond what I ever thought it would do. It's probably one of the biggest selling books, craft books, that I'm aware of, and probably the biggest grossing book on making guitars ever. And I'm very proud of that. I'm proud that it's done here, and that it's answered a lot of the questions that people have had, and it's sold all over the world. So I'm really, really happy with that. What's coming up next with Artist Guitars, I hope, is the acoustic electric guitar, a version of that with a cutaway, and the cutaway entirely different way of producing the cutaway in the guitar, which I came up with probably 10 years ago. I really like it. It resolves a huge number of issues with structure in cutaways, in my opinion. I'd like to make a guitar that's a bit more responsive than some of the other guitars that you plug in. And eventually I hope we can come up with an alternative pickup design, a much more lightweight design of the same type of pickup. And then we're talking about Rory, who works for Artist, and I have been discussing a project possibly fitting in a J45 into the program, which I'd really like to do because I think they're a great guitar and they're quite an easy guitar to make. They're a formulaic sort of thing, and you can use less expensive timbers. You don't need to use high-grade spruce top on them. They work better with all the ones I've ever owned. The spruce tops on them have been a lower grade spruce top, and you can use like mahogany back and sides, or you could use plain blackwood back and sides. There'd be a number of lesser grade timbers that you can use to make a guitar that actually sounds really good with that, using the formula. And maybe the workshop that's making the GG1s is highly capable, and they're capable of doing what they're asked to do. They do that so that the design is not being compromised at the factory, which is a problem I had with just about everyone else that I worked with. Either they weren't capable or they decided that, you know, it was too laborious or something or other to do it. But the GG1 is what I designed almost exactly, even to sort of acoustic details. Like this morning we had a look and a listen to the top and the back relationship of the guitar. I want the back of the guitar stiffer than the top of the guitar, and that's what we got. And I think it's about 3 semitones away. The back is 3 semitones stiffer than the top, and that's what I want. And that's what we got. And that's pretty amazing out of it's not, to my knowledge, I don't know who these people are. I've never met them that are making the guitars, but I'm told that it's a small workshop of 5 or 6 people, and they are extremely capable. And the other thing, maybe we'd get into utilising some of the bracing concepts in the book on another guitar, but that gets you into a much more complex level of sort of construction, and it's not a norm, and it's not something that a lot of guitar factories would be comfortable trying to do. But it'd be interesting if we could, because it works extremely well. And you know, it's sort of a bit of a digression, but you get to the stage with the traditional materials in your braces particularly, where you can't go any further. Wood's wood, and you can select the best wood, and you pick the wood that's got the best stiffness to weight ratio and the lowest damping, etc., etc. But then you start looking at composite bracing with carbon fibre and other materials like paulownia or spruce, or, you know, other lighter suitable material, and you can produce a guitar which you can't produce with timber in the braces. It's like why there's no wooden tennis rackets, and why Formula One cars aren't made out of metal anymore. They're carbon fibre Kevlar composites. And I'm not saying it's a universal solution for all the problems of guitar making. It's not. It has to be used very selectively and very carefully. But if you get it right, you can do what you can't do with timber alone. And that would be a really interesting thing to, if we could get that sort of thing happening with another guitar, which would be a lot more expensive, it'd have to be, but it could be a real winner, would be a real winner. So they're the sort of things I would like to be involved with them. And it has been a very good relationship with Artist Guitars and myself. Probably out of all the people I've worked with over the last 30 or 40 years, Artist Guitars have been the best people to work with, the most responsive, the people who made sure that the design got done. And, we didn't have any problems with materials or implementation of design. So yeah, it's been good. I've enjoyed it.